I didn't turn around right away because a part of me hoped I heard it wrong. You know how sometimes you catch a sentence that doesn't feel meant for you? Something quiet, something careless, something you're not supposed to hear. That's what it felt like. But I heard it, clear enough. She doesn't belong here. And they said it sitting right behind me in church. I kept my eyes forward, didn't move, didn't react. Because at that moment, I told myself the same thing I think anyone would. It's not about you. It couldn't be. Not here. Not in a place like this. The choir was still singing, soft voices, calm music. Everything around me felt normal, but something had shifted. I could feel it. Not loud, not obvious, just different. Like the room had quietly changed and I was the only one who noticed. I adjusted slightly in my seat. I tried to focus on the front. I tried to listen, but my ears weren't there anymore. They were behind me, waiting, listening. And then I heard it again, a whisper, lower this time. She really thinks she can just sit here like nothing happened. My chest tightened, not from anger, from confusion, because now it didn't feel like a random comment. It felt directed. But I still didn't turn around. Not yet. Because the moment you turn around, you make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. So I sat there, still, quiet, listening to words that weren't meant for me, but somehow felt like they were. I glanced around the room slowly. Nothing obvious. No one was staring. No one pointed. Just familiar faces doing familiar things. But even that felt different now, because once you hear something like that, you start looking at everything differently. Every glance, every silence, every small reaction. And suddenly, what felt normal a few minutes ago doesn't anymore. The music ended. People shifted in their seats. A few voices murmured, and I could feel it again, that same quiet tension right behind me. I took a slow breath, and this time I almost turned, almost, but something in me held back because I realized something at that moment. If they were talking about me, then this didn't start today. This had already been happening, quietly, without me knowing it, and I was just now walking into it. I kept my eyes forward, but my mind wasn't, because one question had already settled in and it wasn't going away. Who were they talking about, and why did it feel like it was me? By the time the service ended, I still hadn't turned around, not because I forgot, but because something in me was trying to hold on to the version of the morning that still felt normal. People began to stand, the usual movement, the quiet shuffling, soft greetings, hands reaching across aisles. Everything looked the same on the surface, but it didn't feel the same anymore. I stood up slowly and adjusted my jacket, taking my time, letting a few people pass in front of me. I told myself I was just being polite, but the truth was, I didn't want to face whoever had been sitting behind me. Not yet. I stepped into the aisle and gave a small smile to someone I recognized. They smiled back, but it didn't reach their eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. It was quick, subtle, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention now. I nodded and kept walking. A few steps forward, I greeted another woman, someone I had spoken to many times before. "Good morning," I said. She hesitated, just for a second, then gave a polite nod, but her body had already turned away before the moment could become a conversation. That wasn't normal. Not here. Not with her. I slowed down slightly, letting the space around me open up as people moved toward the exit. Conversations were happening all around me, soft voices, light laughter, the kind of sounds that usually made this place feel warm, but now it felt distant. It felt like I was standing in the middle of something I wasn't fully part of. I glanced to my left. Two people were talking quietly, and as my eyes passed them, their voices dropped. Not completely silent, just lower, controlled. Then one of them looked at me. Only for a moment. Then I looked away. I kept walking. Calm on the outside, but inside something was shifting. Because one moment like that can mean nothing. 2 moments can still be explained, but when it starts to repeat, you feel it. No one has to say it directly. You just know. I stepped outside into the daylight, expecting the feeling to ease once I left the room. It didn't. People were gathered in small groups near the entrance, talking, greeting each other, making plans like they always did. I had stood in that same space many times, had those same conversations. But this time, as I walked past, the energy changed again. Not dramatically, just enough. A pause in conversation, a glance, then voices picking back up, slightly lower. I stopped near the steps and looked around. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. That's when it became clear. This wasn't one comment. This wasn't one moment. This was something that had already settled into the room before I even walked in, something that didn't start today, something I hadn't noticed until now. I folded my hands in front of me and stood there, steady and composed. I wasn't going to react without understanding, not yet. But I couldn't ignore it either. Because whatever it was, it had a direction, and somehow that direction kept leading back to me. I took a slow breath and looked back toward the church doors. For the first time that morning, I stopped asking if something was wrong and started asking what exactly had changed and why I was the last to know. I didn't leave right away, even though everything in me said I should, because walking away would have been easier than standing there feeling something I couldn't explain, easier than asking questions I might not want answers to. But I stayed. I had been coming to that church for years, long before some of the faces I saw that morning, long before the quiet groups, the small circles, the conversations that seemed to close the moment I got close. I knew this place, or at least I thought I did. I stepped down from the entrance and moved toward a familiar spot near the side of the building where I used to stand and talk after service. That's where I saw her, Mrs. Carter. She had known me for years. We had shared meals, conversations, even prayers for each other's families. If there was anyone who would act normal, it would be her. I approached her slowly, keeping my expression calm. "Good morning," I said. She turned toward me, and for a moment it looked the same face, the same posture, but something underneath it had changed. "Oh, good morning," she replied. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. I waited. Usually she would ask how I was doing. Usually she would mention something about the service. Usually she would stay. But this time, she didn't. She glanced over my shoulder like she was expecting someone else, then adjusted her bag. "I have to go meet someone," she said quickly. Too quickly. Before I could respond, she was already stepping away. I stood there for a moment, watching her walk off. And that's when it settled in, not as a thought, as a feeling. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a bad morning. This wasn't people being distracted. This was distance, intentional distance. I folded my arms lightly and took a slow breath, because a new question had started to form. Not just what's happening, but something deeper. Did I miss something? I went back over the last few weeks in my mind, every conversation, every interaction, trying to find the moment where things changed, trying to remember if I said something wrong, did something wrong, missed something important. But nothing stood out.
Nothing clear, nothing that explained this. And that's when the doubt started. Quiet at first, then stronger. Because when you don't have answers, your mind starts creating them. Maybe I said something. Maybe I didn't notice something. Maybe it really was me. I shook that thought off almost immediately because it didn't feel right. Not fully, but it was there, and that was enough. I looked back at the church doors again. People were still coming out, still talking, still moving like everything was normal. And maybe for them it was. But for me, something had cracked, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to let something in. Uncertainty. Because whatever this was, it wasn't new. It had been there before I noticed it, before I heard that whisper, before I sat down in that pew. And somehow I walked into the middle of it without even knowing it. I told myself I wasn't going to overreact, not without proof, not without something clear, because feelings can be misleading, and I didn't want to turn something small into something bigger than it really was. So I stayed a little longer, watched, paid attention, and that's when it stopped being subtle. A few minutes later, I saw someone I knew walking toward me, Mr. Daniels. We had spoken many times before, not close, but familiar enough for a conversation. I straightened slightly and gave a small, polite smile. "Good morning," I said as he got closer. He looked at me, not past me, at me. For a brief second, it felt normal. Then something changed. His expression tightened just slightly, and instead of stopping, he nodded once and kept walking. No words, no pause, just a nod and distance. I stood there, my smile fading slowly. That wasn't like him, not here, not after all the times we had stood and talked without hesitation. I turned slightly, watching him walk past me and join another group. And the moment he stepped into that circle, he relaxed, started talking, like nothing was wrong, like nothing had just happened. I looked away, took a slow breath. I tried to settle it in my mind. Maybe he was in a hurry. Maybe he didn't see me clearly. Maybe. But before I could finish that thought, something else happened. A woman nearby was holding a seat on one of the benches. I had seen her do it before, saving spots for people she knew. I stepped closer, not assuming anything, just moving naturally. "Is this seat taken?" I asked. She looked up at me, and this time there was no hesitation. "Yes," she said, flat, quick. I nodded, "All right," and I stepped back. But as I turned slightly, I noticed something. The seat stayed empty. No one came, no one approached. Minutes passed, and that space remained open. That's when it stopped being a question, because politeness doesn't leave a seat empty. Politeness doesn't avoid a greeting. Politeness doesn't lower voices when you walk by. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was something else, something deliberate. I moved away from the bench and stood near the edge of the walkway, giving myself space, letting the movement of people pass around me. And for the first time that morning, I didn't try to explain it away. I let it be what it was. Because once something becomes clear, you don't need to soften it to make yourself comfortable. You just have to face it. And what I was facing wasn't just distance, it was a rejection. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. I looked around one more time, not searching anymore, just confirming what I already knew. The glances, the pauses, the way conversations adjusted when I got close. It was all connected, all pointing in the same direction. And in that direction was me. I stood there for a moment, steady, composed, not reacting outwardly, because whatever this was, it wasn't going to be solved by guessing, and it wasn't going to disappear if I ignored it. Someone knew something. Someone had said something, and whatever it was, it had already spread. I just hadn't heard it yet. But I would, because now I wasn't just feeling it anymore. I was watching it clearly. I left not long after that, not because I wanted to, but because staying there, pretending everything was normal, felt harder than walking away. The conversations, the glances, the silence, it all followed me, even as I stepped away from the building. I walked slowly to my car. No rush, no sudden movement, just steady steps, like I needed time to process what had just happened. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands resting in my lap, eyes forward, quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, the kind that makes everything louder. Because once you're alone, you can't ignore what you felt anymore. And that's when my mind started going back. Not this morning, before, to when things were different, to when this place actually felt like it belonged to me. I remembered the first time I walked into that church. I didn't know anyone. I didn't expect much, but someone greeted me at the door with a smile that felt real, not practiced, not polite, real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I stayed that day. Then I came back the next week, and the week after that. Slowly, it became routine. Then it became something more. It became a place I trusted, a place where I didn't have to explain myself, where I could sit, breathe, and feel like I was part of something steady, something consistent, something good. And my son, he knew what that place meant to me. There were days he would call and ask if I made it to service, not because he was checking on me, because he understood. He knew I needed that space, that peace. I remember one afternoon, we were sitting together in the living room. No noise, just quiet conversation. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "I'm glad you have somewhere that feels right." I smiled when he said that, because it did feel right for a long time, and I held on to that, even after he was gone. Even when everything else started shifting, that place stayed the same, or at least I thought it did. I blinked slowly and looked down at my hands, because now, sitting in that car, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. It hadn't stayed the same. I just didn't notice when it started to change. Or maybe I noticed small things and chose to ignore them. A shorter conversation here, a missed greeting there. Moments that didn't feel quite right, but not strong enough to question. Until now. Because what happened today wasn't new. It was just clearer, stronger, impossible to ignore. I leaned back slightly in my seat and let out a slow breath. Because it's one thing to lose something suddenly, it's another thing to realize it's been slipping away quietly, right in front of you. That place used to feel like home, not just a building, not just a routine, but something deeper, something that held meaning. And now, I wasn't sure what it was anymore, or if it ever had been what I believed it was. I looked back toward the church through the windshield. People were still outside, still talking, still moving like everything was the same. And maybe for them, it was. But for me, something had changed. Not just in the room, not just in how they looked at me, but in how I saw it.
Because once you realize something isn't what you thought it was, you can't go back to seeing it the same way again. And sitting there in that car, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to fix itself, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I was about to leave. My hand was already on the key, ready to start the car and put distance between me and whatever that morning had become. But something made me pause. I don't know if it was instinct or just the feeling that walking away right then would leave too many questions unanswered. So I stepped out of the car, closed the door behind me, and turned back toward the church. Most people are gone now. The crowd had thinned out. Only a few small groups remained, scattered near the entrance and along the walkway. The energy was quieter, less movement, but the feeling was still there. I walked slowly, not toward anyone in particular, just present, observing. And that's when I noticed her. She wasn't standing with a group. She wasn't talking, just watching. Not in a way that would draw attention, but enough that if you were paying attention, you'd see it. And I was paying attention. Our eyes met for a brief second. She looked away quickly, too quickly. That told me everything. I didn't rush over. I didn't call out. I just walked in her direction at a normal pace, giving her time to either leave or stay. She stayed, but she shifted slightly, like she was unsure. When I got close, I stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me," I said gently. She turned back toward me. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't distant like the others. It was hesitant. "Yes?" she replied. I studied her for a moment, not in a confrontational way, just trying to understand. "I just wanted to ask you something," I said. My voice is calm, steady. She nodded slightly, but I could see it in her posture. She was already uncomfortable. "I heard something during service, and I've been trying to understand if it has anything to do with me." There was a brief silence, not long, but enough. Her eyes shifted, not away completely, just enough to show she was thinking, carefully, choosing what to say or what not to say. "I don't know what you heard," she said, and technically that wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. I could hear it in her voice, not what she said, how she said it. I held her gaze, not pushing, just present. "Something feels off," I added, "and I'm not trying to accuse anyone, I just want to understand." That's when it changed. Not her words, her expression. Something softened, then tightened again, like she was deciding between two things, staying silent or saying something she probably wasn't supposed to say. She glanced around briefly, checking, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then she stepped a little closer, not enough to draw attention, just enough to lower her voice. "You didn't hear it from me," she said quietly. There it was, the shift, the moment where uncertainty becomes something real. My chest tightened slightly, but I stayed still, listening. "There's been talk," she continued. Talk. That word carried more weight than anything else she could have said. "What kind of talk?" I asked. My voice is still calm, but I'm more focused now. She hesitated, again, but this time not for long. "About you," she said. Clear, direct, no confusion, no guessing, just the truth. For a second, everything around us faded. Not literally, but enough that her words were the only thing I was hearing. "Why?" I asked. One word, simple, but it held everything. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know everything," she said quickly, "but people have been saying things. Things. Always things. Unclear, unconfirmed." It was powerful enough to change how people looked at you, how they treated you, how they decided whether you belonged. I let that settle for a moment because I understood something now. This wasn't about one person or one moment. This had spread quietly from one conversation to another, from one person to the next, until it became something accepted without being questioned. I looked at her again. "Do you believe it?" I asked. That caught her off guard. She wasn't expecting that. "I don't know," she admitted. It was honest, uncomfortable, real, and that was enough. Because I wasn't looking for certainty anymore. I was looking for direction, and she had given me that. I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said. She didn't respond right away, just gave a small nod and stepped back, relieved, like she had said just enough without saying too much. I turned away from her and looked back toward the church one more time. Now everything made sense. Not the details, not the full story, but the pattern, the looks, the distance, the silence. It all came from something that had already taken shape before I even realized it existed. And now I wasn't just feeling it or seeing it, I was stepping into it. Because whatever they were saying, whatever they believed, I was going to hear it for myself, not through whispers, not through distance, but directly. And this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I didn't go home, not yet, because now that I knew something was being said, walking away would have meant leaving it unfinished, and I wasn't going to do that. Not this time. I turned back toward the church doors and walked inside. The building was quieter now. Most people had already left, and only a few remained, scattered across the room, gathering their things or finishing conversations. The air felt different, not heavy like before, just still, like something was waiting. I stepped down the aisle slowly, my footsteps soft, my eyes steady and focused. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was looking for answers, and I knew exactly where to start. Near the front, I saw her, the same woman whose voice I had heard behind me during the service. I hadn't turned around then, but I knew. Something about the tone, the rhythm, the certainty stayed with me. And now, standing there, watching her speak to someone near the front, I felt it again, that same quiet recognition. I walked toward her, not fast, not slow, just steady. She noticed me before I reached her, and her conversation paused, not completely, but enough. When I stopped in front of her, the other person beside her stepped back slightly, like they already understood this wasn't a casual moment. "I need a moment," I said. Not loud, not sharp, just clear. She looked at me, and for a second she held her composure, but then I saw it. A flicker, recognition, maybe even expectation, like she knew this moment might come. "Yes," she replied, her voice controlled and careful. I nodded once. "I heard what was said during the service," I said, not accusing, not raising my voice, just stating the truth. The space between us shifted, not dramatically, but enough. "I don't know what you mean," she said, quickly, too quickly. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's pressure, and she felt it. I could see it in the way her posture adjusted slightly, in the way her eyes didn't hold mine as steadily as before. "I heard the words," I continued. "She doesn't belong here." This time I said it clearly, out loud, not as a whisper or something hidden, but as something real. The person standing beside her looked away and took a small step back, creating space, because now this wasn't quiet anymore. Her expression changed, not completely, but enough to show she understood exactly what I meant. "I think you misunderstood," she said. There it was, the first defense. I nodded slightly. "That's possible," I replied, "which is why I'm asking you directly." My voice stayed steady and controlled because I wasn't there to argue, I was there to remove the uncertainty. "To understand what was meant," I added. She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any immediate answer could have, because if there was nothing behind it, there would be no pause, no thought, no calculation. But there was. She glanced briefly to the side, then back at me, and in that moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something she didn't want to say out loud, not here, not directly. "People talk," she said, not answering, just redirecting. "Sometimes things get taken out of context." I let her finish, then took a small breath. "Then help me understand the context," I said, still calm, still steady, but now firm, because I wasn't going to accept something vague, not when it had already changed how I was being treated, not when it had already spread beyond a whisper. Her composure tightened slightly, like she was holding something in place. "I don't think this is the right place for this conversation," she said. And there it was, not denial, avoidance, which is its own kind of answer. I nodded once, slow and measured, because I understood what she was doing, and I understood something else, too. She wasn't going to say it, not directly, not in a way that could be repeated, but she didn't need to, because everything around it had already said enough. I held her gaze for one more second, not challenging, not emotional, just clear. "All right," I said, and stepped back. Not because I was finished, but because I had reached the limit of what she was willing to give. For now. I turned and walked away, and as I did, I felt it clearly. No confusion anymore, no doubt, just clarity. Because sometimes the truth isn't in what people say, it's in what they refuse to say. And what she refused to say told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a rumor that just started. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up in a sentence. This was something that had already been built, already shared, already believed. And now it was time for me to hear it completely,
not in pieces, not in whispers, but fully. Because whatever they thought they knew about me, I was about to find out why. And this time, I wasn't walking away without the truth. I didn't leave after that, because now it wasn't about what I felt, it was about what was being said, and I needed to hear it clearly. Not pieces, no guesses, not quiet warnings. The truth.
I stepped outside again, slower this time and more aware. The groups were smaller now, with only a few people left near the side of the building, talking, watching, waiting. And this time, I didn't avoid it. I walked straight toward them. The conversation didn't stop immediately, but it changed just enough. Voices lowered, eyes shifted, the same pattern as before. But this time, I didn't slow down. I stopped right there, close enough that no one could pretend I wasn't part of the moment. No one spoke at first, and I didn't rush to fill it because I wasn't there to guess anymore. "I think it's time someone says it clearly," I said. My voice was calm, not loud, but steady enough to hold the space. A few of them exchanged quick glances, the kind people give when something unspoken suddenly becomes visible. No one stepped forward right away, and that told me everything, because when something is true, people don't hesitate to say it. But when something is built on assumptions, on whispers, on things passed from one person to another, people pause because no one wants to own it. I looked from face to next, not accusing, not angry, just present. "I've heard enough to know something is being said about me," I continued. "So I'm asking directly, what is it?" That's when it happened. A voice from the side spoke up, not the loudest or the strongest, but clear enough to say, "We were told you've been taking money." The words landed heavy. For a moment, nothing moved, not the air, not the people, just the weight of what had been said. I didn't react immediately because reacting too quickly would have made it emotional, and this wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about the truth. "Taking money?" I repeated, not in disbelief, but in clarity. The woman who spoke stepped forward slightly, not confident, not unsure, just repeating what she believed. "From the donation fund," she added, "that you've been handling things quietly." I let that settle, because now everything is connected. The distance, the silence, the looks, it all came from this. Not something I had done, but something they believed, something that had been passed around piece by piece until it became something solid. I looked from one face to the next, not accusing, not angry, just present. "I've heard enough to know something is being said about me," I continued. "So I'm asking directly, what is it?" That's when it happened. "Who told you that?" I asked. No anger, just direction. There was another pause, another exchange of glances, and then the answer came. "Mrs. Carter mentioned it," someone said quietly. Mrs. Carter. I felt that name settle, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. This didn't start in a group. It started with one voice and then spread. I nodded slowly, because now I understood the structure of it, where it began, how it moved, how it reached the point where people could say I didn't belong, not based on fact, but based on repetition. I looked back at them, all of them, faces that once felt familiar, now just watching and waiting. I took a small breath and spoke clearly. There is no missing money. No hesitation, no uncertainty. I've never handled anything without record, I continued. Every donation, every contribution, everything that's ever passed through my hands is documented. I could see it, not belief yet, but a shift, because truth doesn't always convince immediately, but it disrupts certainty. And if anyone had asked me directly, I added, we wouldn't be standing here like this. That landed, because that was the truth behind all of it. No one asked. They assumed. They listened. They repeated.
But they never came to me. The woman who spoke earlier stepped back slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to show the confidence she had wasn't as strong anymore. The group wasn't tight anymore either. It had loosened. Because once something is questioned, it doesn't hold the same shape. I looked at them one more time, and in that moment, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt in the way I expected to be. I was clear, because now I know what was said, who said it, and how it spread. And more importantly, I knew it wasn't true. And that changed everything. Because once the truth is clear, the power shifts. Not loudly, not instantly, but completely. And standing there, I could feel it, the same way I felt the tension earlier, except this time it wasn't against me. It had turned, and they felt it too. No one spoke right away, not after that. The words had already done what they needed to do. They settled into the space and stayed there. I looked around at the same faces that just hours ago couldn't meet my eyes. Now they were looking, not with certainty, not with quiet agreement, but with something else. Doubt. The kind that comes when something you believe no longer holds. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat myself, because the truth doesn't need to fight once it's been said clearly. It just stands there and lets everything else adjust around it. One of them shifted uncomfortably. Another looked down. The woman who had spoken earlier took a small step back, like she needed distance from what she had just repeated. And that's when it became clear. Not everything needs a confrontation to end. Some things end the moment they're exposed. I took a slow breath and straightened slightly. Not to prove anything, just because I could. Because the weight I felt walking into that space was no longer mine. I'm not going to defend something I didn't do, I said calmly. Not to them, to the moment. To anyone who has questions, you can come to me directly. Simple, clear, no emotion. Because I wasn't asking for approval, I was setting a boundary. I let that settle, then continued. But I won't stay in a place where people decide who I am without ever speaking to me. That shifted something, not loudly, but enough. Because now it wasn't about what they said, it was about what I accepted. And I wasn't accepting it, not anymore. I looked at them one last time, not searching for agreement, not waiting for an apology, just seeing them clearly. Because that was the difference now. Earlier, I was trying to understand what had changed. Now, I understood exactly what it was, and more importantly, what it wasn't. This wasn't true. This wasn't fact. This was an assumption, and assumption doesn't hold power once it's challenged. I turned away. Not slowly, not dramatically, just done. The same walkway I stood on earlier felt different now, lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't carrying it anymore.